Have you ever had the quiet feeling that you no longer belong to the world the way you once did? Not in a dramatic way, not because something terrible happened, just a subtle, almost uncomfortable sense that something feels off. You might still wake up, drink your coffee, check the news, scroll through conversations, sit in familiar rooms with familiar people, and yet, beneath all of that, there's a strange distance, as if you're present, but not fully inside the experience anymore. The noise of the world feels louder, but also more hollow. Conversations repeat themselves. The constant urgency of society, the rush, the outrage, the endless opinions no longer pulls you in the way it once did. If that's you, I want to say this gently and very clearly. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not losing your mind. And you are not failing at life. In fact, what you may be experiencing is not a problem at all. It may be a doorway. Many people assume that awakening looks dramatic. They expect flashes of light, instant peace, or a sudden sense of clarity. But for most of us, it begins much more quietly. It begins as a subtle disconnection from the world we once felt deeply embedded in. You might notice that the news no longer feels informative, only draining. That social roles feel strangely performative. That conversations you once enjoyed now feel shallow, repetitive, or exhausting. And this can be unsettling, especially if you've lived many decades building a life, relationships, and identity within that world. When the familiar no longer feels nourishing, the mind immediately tries to diagnose the feeling. It asks, "What's wrong with me?" Or, "Why can't I just enjoy things the way I used to?" But what if the question itself is backwards? What if this sense of disconnection is not a loss but a release? What if your consciousness is no longer fully resonating with the old frequency it once occupied? In quantum physics, everything is understood as vibration. Every particle, every field, every form is not static, but alive with movement and energy. And when the frequency of one system changes, it naturally falls out of alignment with systems vibrating at a different rate. The same principle applies to consciousness. When your awareness begins to shift, even subtly, the world you once felt synchronized with can start to feel foreign, not because it has changed, but because you have. This is why the disconnection often feels confusing. The outer world looks the same, but your inner response to it has softened, loosened, or quietly withdrawn. It's like standing in a room where the music is still playing, but you've stopped dancing. Everyone else seems to be moving to a rhythm you can hear, but no longer feel compelled to follow. And here's the part most people don't tell you. This stage is deeply uncomfortable for the ego. The ego, that collection of roles, stories, identities, and expectations, depends on belonging. It wants definition. It wants validation. It wants to know where it stands in relation to others. So when you begin to feel less invested in comparison, competition, or approval, the ego interprets that as danger. It whispers that you're becoming isolated. It warns that you're drifting too far away. It urges you to fix the feeling, to reinsert yourself into the noise. But awakening does not begin with adding something new to your life. It begins with a quiet subtraction. It begins when the constant pull outward loosens, and awareness naturally turns inward, not through effort, but through exhaustion, with pretending. Many people describe this phase as loneliness, and from the surface, it can look that way. You might find yourself less interested in gatherings, less eager to explain yourself, less willing to argue or convince. You may sit in silence more often, not because you are sad, but because silence feels honest. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is energetic realignment. Think of it like a river that has been forcing itself upstream for years, following expectations, obligations, and inherited beliefs. One day, without drama, it simply stops fighting gravity. It doesn't rush forward. It doesn't collapse. It just begins to flow differently, more naturally, more effortlessly. That's what this disconnection really is. Your consciousness is no longer pushing itself to fit into patterns that no longer reflect its truth. And the mind doesn't like that. The mind wants explanations, labels, timelines. It wants to know when this phase will end and what it will turn into. But awakening is not a process that can be managed from the mind. The more you try to analyze it, the more resistance you create. This is where many people get stuck. They sense the shift, but instead of allowing it, they judge it. They try to repair themselves. They search for ways to feel normal again. But normal was never peace. Normal was just familiar. What you're being invited into now is not chaos, even though it may feel uncertain. It's a deeper relationship with awareness itself, the part of you that was never defined by roles, achievements, or opinions. This is why the disconnection often coincides with heightened sensitivity. You may feel more affected by crowded spaces, loud environments, or emotionally charged conversations. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It's learning to rest in presence rather than stimulation. And presence doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It doesn't compete. Presence simply is. When you stop trying to fix this feeling, something interesting happens. The fear around it begins to soften. You realize that you are not disappearing. You are becoming more intimate with yourself. You start to notice small moments of stillness that feel nourishing rather than empty. A quiet morning, a slow walk, a breath that lands deeper in the body. These moments don't excite the ego, but they soothe the soul. And slowly, the idea that you must belong to the world in the same way you once did begins to dissolve. Because belonging was never about fitting in. It was about remembering who you are beneath the noise. This is why separation and connection are not opposites. What looks like separation from the outside is often a deeper form of connection on the inside. You are not pulling away from life, you are touching it at a subtler, more honest level. You are no longer consuming experience, you are witnessing it. And witnessing is not passive, it is profoundly alive. So if you find yourself standing slightly apart from the world right now, unsure of where you fit, unsure of what comes next, let this be your reassurance. You are not lost, you are not failing, you are not broken, you are remembering. And sometimes, remembering feels like standing alone, not because you are disconnected, but because you are no longer pretending to be something you're not. In that space, something quiet and powerful begins to emerge. A sense of home that does not depend on circumstances. A connection that does not require effort. Because sometimes, the most profound connection doesn't come from reaching outward. It comes from finally resting inward. And that, quietly, gently, is how awakening begins. 1. The feeling of no longer fitting into the old world. There is a moment that often arrives quietly, without announcement, when you begin to sense that the world you once moved through so naturally no longer feels like home. And it can be deeply unsettling because nothing on the surface has changed enough to justify the shift you feel inside. The same streets are there, the same routines, the same people, the same conversations repeating themselves day after day. Yet something within you has grown distant, not out of bitterness or disappointment, but out of a subtle loss of resonance, like a song you once loved that now plays in the background without touching you the way it used to. Things that once felt important begin to fade in their emotional weight, not because you have become careless or ungrateful, but because your inner center of gravity has moved. Achievements that once motivated you, titles that once defined you, goals that once filled your thoughts, now feel strangely neutral, as though they belong to a previous chapter of your life that has already been read and quietly set aside. You may still respect these things, still understand their value in the world, but they no longer pull at your sense of identity, and this can create a strange emptiness that the mind does not know how to categorize. Conversations change as well, often becoming one of the first places where this shift becomes undeniable. You may find yourself sitting with people you care about, listening politely, nodding at the right moments, yet feeling as though the words are skimming the surface of something much deeper that no one seems interested in touching. Small talk begins to feel exhausting, not because you are above it, but because it feels disconnected from what is alive within you now. Discussions driven by fear, outrage, comparison, or the need to be right start to feel hollow, and you may notice a growing silence inside you where opinions once rushed to fill the space. Along with this comes a natural loss of interest in competition and proving yourself, a soft but unmistakable withdrawal from the endless measuring that society encourages. The drive to win, to be seen, to be ahead of others gradually loosens its grip, and while this can look like passivity from the outside, it is actually a sign of deep internal maturity. You begin to sense that no amount of external validation can add to what you are becoming aware of within yourself. And so the race quietly loses its meaning. At some point, you may realize that you are no longer fully immersed in the collective flow that once carried you along. It can feel as though you are standing on the riverbank, while the current of the old world continues to rush past, full of urgency, noise, and repetition. You are still close enough to see it clearly, but far enough away to feel its distance. And this position can feel lonely at first because the mind equates separation with loss. Yet what is actually happening is not rejection, but perspective, a widening of awareness that no longer needs to be swept along unconsciously. This sense of standing outside the old flow often brings confusion, because the mind wants to return to what is familiar, even when what is familiar no longer feels true. You may try to reinsert yourself, to care again in the same way, to force enthusiasm or interest back into places where it once lived naturally. But effort only amplifies the discomfort. The more you try to fit back into the old shape of your life, the more obvious it becomes that something essential has shifted, and pretending otherwise begins to feel like a form of self-betrayal. From the perspective of consciousness, this stage is not a failure of connection, but a refinement of it. Awareness is no longer resonating with the old layer of experience, much like a musical instrument that has been retuned and can no longer harmonize with the previous key. The world itself has not become wrong, and you have not become superior to it. But the frequency at which your inner life is now vibrating simply no longer matches the old patterns that once felt natural. This is where compassion for yourself becomes essential, because the mind will often interpret this transition as something to be fixed, rather than something to be understood. You may wonder why you feel less engaged, less reactive, less emotionally invested in the collective drama, and you may judge yourself for it, fearing that you are becoming detached or indifferent. But indifference is closed, and what you are experiencing is actually more open, more sensitive, more aware of what truly matters beneath the surface of things. In this space, you begin to see how much of the old world operates on momentum rather than presence, on habit rather than awareness. You notice how often people speak without listening, react without feeling, strive without rest, and you may feel a quiet sadness for the exhaustion that drives so much of human behavior. Yet even this sadness is different from despair, because it is held within a wider understanding that everyone is moving at the level of consciousness they are ready for, just as you once did. The realization that your awareness no longer fully resonates with the old world is not an endpoint, but a threshold. It marks the beginning of a more honest relationship with life, one that does not depend on constant stimulation or validation to feel meaningful. As you allow yourself to remain in this in-between space, without rushing to define it or escape it, something within you begins to settle, and you may notice a growing sense of inner alignment that does not require external confirmation. This is the quiet truth that often reveals itself only through lived experience. When consciousness outgrows an old layer of reality, it does not announce its departure with certainty or clarity, but with subtle discomfort and gentle withdrawal. And if you can meet that discomfort with patience rather than fear, with curiosity rather than judgment, you begin to discover that what felt like not belonging is actually the first sign of returning to a deeper, more authentic sense of self that was always there, waiting beneath the noise of the world. 2. The ego is dissolving and it feels uncomfortable. There comes a phase on this path where the discomfort you feel is no longer coming from the world around you, but from the structures inside you that are quietly loosening their grip. And this is often the most misunderstood part of awakening, because it does not feel peaceful at first. It feels disorienting, unfamiliar, and at times deeply unsettling. The ego, which has spent a lifetime organizing your identity, your place in society, and your sense of belonging, does not step aside gracefully. It resists, not because it is evil or wrong, but because its entire purpose has always been to keep you anchored in what is known. The ego wants to belong, to be seen, to be acknowledged, and to be certain of its position in the world. It thrives on roles, labels, and recognition, and it measures safety through comparison and continuity. When those structures begin to soften, the ego experiences it as a threat, even though nothing harmful is actually happening. You may notice that praise no longer feels as nourishing as it once did, that criticism no longer stings in the same way, and that being understood by others feels less urgent. And while this may sound liberating, it can also feel strangely empty at first. That emptiness is often misunderstood as something going wrong. When the ego weakens, a gap appears where constant self-reference once lived, and the mind rushes in to fill that gap with concern. It may ask why you feel less defined, less motivated by external approval, less interested in asserting who you are. But this space is not a loss of self. It is the loosening of a false center that was never meant to carry the full weight of your being. Many people describe this phase as feeling hollow or directionless, as though the compass that guided them for years has suddenly stopped working. Goals that once structured your life may lose their emotional charge, and routines that once gave you a sense of identity may begin to feel mechanical. This can create fear, because the ego equates direction with worth, and without clear markers of progress, it assumes something has gone wrong. Yet this loss of direction is not failure. It is a transition, a shift from being driven by conditioned identity to being guided by awareness itself. In physics, when a system changes state, there is often a moment of instability before a new pattern emerges. The same is true here. Consciousness is reorganizing itself, and the old reference points can no longer support the new configuration. This is why the experience feels ungrounded, even though it is actually a deeper form of grounding that has not yet revealed its shape. You are no longer being held up by external definitions, but you have not yet learned to rest fully in presence. This stage has often been described with the metaphor of the caterpillar before becoming a butterfly, not because it is poetic, but because it captures the raw truth of the experience. Inside the cocoon, the caterpillar does not slowly improve itself into something better. Its old structure breaks down completely. What it was dissolves before what it will become can take form. From the inside, this is not a beautiful process. It is chaotic, confusing, and seemingly destructive. Yet without that dissolution, transformation is impossible. The ego experiences this as discomfort because it senses its own impermanence. It tries to reassert itself through old patterns, old stories, old fears, and you may notice sudden waves of doubt, restlessness, or a desire to retreat into familiar habits. This is not a step backward. It is the nervous system responding to change. The key is not to fight this reaction, but to observe it with patience, allowing it to move through without giving it authority. What makes this phase particularly challenging is that the old self is clearly fading, while the new self has not yet taken shape. You are no longer who you were, but you cannot yet articulate who you are becoming. The mind dislikes this in-between space because it cannot label it or control it. Yet this space is where real transformation occurs, not through effort, but through surrender. You may feel less compelled to explain yourself to others, not out of withdrawal, but out of a growing sense that explanations no longer capture what is happening within you. Language begins to feel inadequate, and silence becomes more honest. This can create distance in relationships that were once built on shared identities or expectations. And while that distance can feel painful, it also reveals which connections were sustained by roles rather than presence. As the ego dissolves, you may notice that emotional reactions slow down. Triggers that once dominated your inner landscape lose their intensity. And while this can feel like numbness at first, it is actually a reduction in unconscious reactivity. You are not becoming less alive. You are becoming less entangled. Life is no longer experienced solely through the filter of personal narrative, but through a wider field of awareness that includes, but is not limited to, the story of you. This is where many people become tempted to rebuild the ego in a more spiritual form, adopting new identities, beliefs, or labels to replace the old ones. While this can provide temporary stability, it often delays the deeper integration that is trying to occur. True awakening is not about creating a better version of the ego. It is about seeing through the need for one altogether. The discomfort you feel is not asking you to fix yourself. It is asking you to rest without a mask, to allow not knowing, to remain present without defining. This is profoundly counter to everything most of us were taught, which is why it feels so challenging. We were taught to become someone. Awakening invites us to remember what we are before becoming anything. As you stay with this process, gently and without urgency, the emptiness begins to change quality. What once felt like a void begins to feel like space. Space to breathe, space to feel, space to be without effort. The nervous system slowly learns that it does not need constant self-definition to survive. Presence becomes enough. And in that quiet space, something new begins to emerge, not as a constructed identity, but as a natural expression of being. You may notice a deeper sense of ease, a softer relationship with time, and a subtle but stable sense of belonging that does not depend on roles or recognition. This belonging does not come from fitting into the world, but from resting fully within yourself. The truth is simple, even though the path to realizing it can feel difficult. What is falling away was never the real you. It was a set of strategies, adaptations, and identities built to navigate a world that required them. As they dissolve, what remains is not emptiness, but essence. And while the transition may feel uncomfortable, uncertain, and lonely at times, it is guided by an intelligence deeper than the mind, one that knows exactly what it is doing, even when you do not. This is not an ending. It is a recalibration. And what comes next does not need to be forced, because it will arise naturally when the space is ready to hold it. 3. You are not isolated, you are turning inward. There is a point in this journey where it can feel as though the world has quietly stepped back from you, or perhaps that you have stepped back from it. And the mind quickly interprets this as isolation, as withdrawal, as something to be corrected. Yet from lived experience, from walking through this terrain slowly and without shortcuts, I can tell you that what is actually happening is far more gentle and far more meaningful. You are not being cut off from life. You are being guided back toward yourself. For most of our lives, the outer world serves as our primary source of identity. We learn who we are by reflecting ourselves in other people's reactions, in our roles, our responsibilities, our accomplishments, and our place within social structures. The external world becomes a mirror through which we constantly check our value, our relevance, our worth. This is not a mistake, but a stage of development, one that teaches us how to function, how to survive, and how to belong within a shared reality. But there comes a moment when that mirror no longer satisfies. You may notice that approval feels thinner, that recognition no longer settles you, that even love, when it is filtered through expectation or dependency, begins to feel incomplete. This is not because the world has failed you, but because your consciousness is no longer meant to source itself from the outside in the same way. The center of gravity begins to shift inward, quietly and naturally, without force. As this happens, attention starts to withdraw from constant external engagement and turns inward, not as an act of avoidance, but as a movement toward depth. You may find yourself less compelled to stay informed about everything happening around you, less reactive to opinions and events, and more interested in what is arising within your own inner landscape. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations that were once drowned out by noise now come into clearer focus, not because they are louder, but because you are listening differently. This inward turn often brings a noticeable change in how you relate to experience. Where you once reacted quickly, now there is a pause. Where you once felt the urge to defend, explain, or assert, there is now a space in which you simply observe. This does not mean you stop caring. It means that care is no longer driven by reflex or fear. You begin to listen more deeply, not only to others, but to yourself, to the subtle signals of your body, your emotions, and your intuition. Listening replaces reacting, because awareness is reclaiming its authority. Reaction belongs to conditioning, to patterns formed through past experiences and unexamined beliefs. Listening belongs to presence. It allows life to move through you without being immediately shaped by habit. This shift can feel disorienting at first, because reaction once provided a sense of certainty, a sense of control. Without it, you may feel exposed, unsure, or even vulnerable. Yet it is precisely this openness that allows something more authentic to emerge. Alongside this change, silence begins to feel less threatening and more familiar. You may notice that you no longer need constant stimulation to feel alive, that moments of quiet no longer signal emptiness, but offer relief. Stillness becomes a place you can rest, rather than a void you need to escape. This is not a withdrawal from life, but a deepening of your relationship with it. In silence, you are no longer defined by what you do or say. You are simply present. This growing comfort with stillness is one of the clearest signs that consciousness is reclaiming energy that was once scattered outward. For years, perhaps decades, your attention may have been divided across countless concerns, worries, ambitions, and distractions. Each demand pulled a small portion of your life force away from the present moment. Now, as the pull of those demands weakens, that energy naturally returns inward, not through effort, but through release. This return of energy can feel strange because we are not taught to recognize it. We are taught to equate engagement with vitality, busyness with purpose, and outward focus with relevance. So when energy begins to settle, when attention gathers instead of dispersing, the mind may label it as disengagement or passivity. But from the inside, it feels more like coherence, like coming back into alignment with yourself. You may notice that your body responds differently as well. Tension that you carried for years begins to soften. Breathing becomes deeper, slower, more natural. The nervous system starts to recognize that it no longer needs to stay in a constant state of alertness. This is not because the world has become safer, but because you are no longer sourcing your sense of safety from external conditions. You are learning, perhaps for the first time, what it feels like to be at home within yourself. This inward turn can also bring moments of emotional clarity that feel almost surprising. Feelings you once avoided or suppressed may surface gently, asking to be felt rather than fixed. Because you are no longer rushing to define or judge them, they move through more freely. Sadness, when it arises, does not overwhelm. Joy, when it appears, does not need to be grasped. Emotions become waves rather than identities. It is important to understand that this phase is not about disconnecting from others or retreating into isolation. You may still engage, still love, still participate in the world, but the quality of that engagement changes. You are no longer trying to extract meaning or validation from every interaction. You are present without agenda. This often makes your presence quieter, less performative, and more grounded, which can feel unfamiliar to those who knew you primarily through your roles or reactions. Some relationships may naturally shift during this time, not because of conflict, but because they were sustained by patterns that no longer resonate. This can bring grief, even when you know the shift is necessary. It is possible to honor what was real and meaningful while also allowing space for what no longer aligns. This, too, is part of turning inward, learning to trust the intelligence of your own unfolding, rather than forcing continuity where it no longer exists. As awareness continues to gather itself, you may notice a subtle but steady sense of inner stability beginning to form. It does not announce itself loudly, and it does not depend on circumstances. It is simply there, like a quiet presence that remains regardless of what comes and goes. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with it, experienced from a deeper place. The mind may still question this process from time to time, wondering if you should be doing more, connecting more, striving more. But with patience, you begin to see that this inward movement is not a detour from life's purpose. It is a return to the source from which meaningful action naturally arises. When energy is no longer scattered, what you do emerges more clearly, more simply, and with far less effort. This is why it is important not to rush this phase or judge it prematurely. Consciousness knows how to recalibrate itself when given space and permission. What feels like withdrawal is actually restoration. What feels like isolation is actually integration. You are not shrinking your world. You are anchoring yourself more deeply within it. In time, this inward stability allows you to re-engage with life in a new way, one that is not driven by need, fear, or identity, but by clarity and presence. But even before that re-engagement takes form, this phase has its own quiet value. It teaches you that you are not dependent on constant external reference to exist meaningfully. It shows you that aliveness is not something you chase, but something you allow. And perhaps most importantly, it reveals a simple truth that often takes a lifetime to understand. You were never meant to live only on the surface of things. The inward turn is not a retreat from the world, but an invitation to meet it from a deeper, more honest place, where connection begins not with noise or effort, but with presence. 4. Quantum science and the shift in frequency. At a certain point, the inner changes you are experiencing begin to ask for a different kind of understanding, one that does not rely only on psychology or personal history, but looks at life through a wider lens. And this is where the language of quantum science can be quietly helpful, not as something mystical or abstract, but as a grounded way of describing what you are already living through. At its most basic level, modern physics shows us that everything in the universe is in motion. Everything is vibrating, and nothing exists as a fixed, solid object in the way our senses once led us to believe. When you look deeply enough, matter reveals itself as energy in relationship, patterns of movement held together by invisible fields. This does not only apply to stars and atoms, but to bodies, thoughts, emotions, and states of awareness. You are not a static being moving through a static world. You are a dynamic field of consciousness, interacting with countless other fields, moment by moment, whether you are aware of it or not. For most of life, this interaction happens unconsciously. Your nervous system, your beliefs, and your conditioning tune you to a certain range of experience. Much like a radio, tuned to a familiar station, you pick up certain signals and ignore others, not by choice, but by resonance. The world you experience feels solid and unquestionable because your internal frequency matches the dominant frequency around you. But when awareness begins to shift, even slightly, the tuning changes. This is why the world can suddenly feel out of sync without any obvious external cause. The same environments, the same conversations, the same routines that once felt natural may begin to feel strangely misaligned. It is not that the world has become wrong, or that people have lost their value. It is that your inner frequency is no longer matching the old signal in the same way. Think of it like a radio that has slowly drifted off its original station. The music is still playing somewhere, but all you hear now is static, fragments of sound that no longer form a coherent experience. You could force yourself to listen, to pretend that nothing has changed, but the dissonance would only grow louder. The discomfort is not a failure of the radio. It is a sign that the tuning has shifted. In human terms, this tuning shift often shows up as a feeling of alienation or restlessness. You may wonder why certain environments drain you now, why certain conversations feel heavy, or why you no longer feel emotionally invested in narratives that once consumed your attention. The mind, which prefers linear explanations, may interpret this as dissatisfaction or depression, but at a deeper level, it is simply resonance changing. When frequency changes, alignment must follow. This is not a moral process, and it is not a judgment on the world or on yourself. It is a natural consequence of growth. Just as a child outgrows the toys that once felt essential, consciousness outgrows certain modes of engagement when it begins to operate at a different level of awareness. Trying to force alignment with what no longer resonates only creates friction. This is why the feeling of being out of place can be such an important signal. It is not meant to be eliminated as quickly as possible. It is meant to be listened to. The discomfort is information. It is telling you that your energy is no longer meant to flow in the same channels, that your attention is being asked to reorganize itself around something quieter, deeper, and more coherent. From the perspective of quantum systems, coherence is not about sameness, but about harmony. When parts of a system vibrate in a way that supports the whole, energy flows with less resistance. When vibration is scattered or forced, energy dissipates. Much of human suffering comes from trying to maintain coherence with environments and identities that no longer support our natural state. As your frequency rises, not in a dramatic or heroic sense, but in a subtle shift toward clarity and presence, you may find that certain forms of stimulation lose their appeal. Drama, urgency, and constant emotional intensity begin to feel exhausting rather than exciting. This does not mean you are becoming dull or disengaged. It means your nervous system is no longer feeding on overstimulation to feel alive. Higher frequency in lived experience, often feels calmer, simpler, and less crowded. It does not seek constant confirmation. It does not require constant movement. It is content with depth rather than breadth. This is why the transition can feel lonely at first. Fewer things resonate. Fewer places feel like home. But what does resonate feels more real. It is important to understand that this shift does not place you above the world. It places you in a different relationship with it. You are still part of the same universe, still connected to the same humanity, but you are no longer vibrating primarily at the level of survival, identity, or constant reaction. Awareness is beginning to organize itself around presence rather than tension. This is where many people become frightened and try to lower their frequency again, not consciously, but through distraction, busyness, or numbing. They sense the unfamiliar stillness and interpret it as emptiness. But stillness is not absence. It is potential. It is the field from which more aligned action can emerge. The feeling of being out of step with the world is often the clearest sign that something inside you has already changed. The mistake is assuming that this feeling means something has gone wrong. In reality, it means the system is recalibrating. Energy is reorganizing itself around a new center of gravity. When you allow this process, instead of resisting it, the sense of disconnection begins to soften. You may still notice differences, but they no longer feel threatening. You understand that resonance will naturally draw new environments, relationships, and forms of expression that match your current state, not through effort, but through alignment. This does not happen overnight. Frequency shifts are gradual, and integration takes time. There is often a period where the old no longer fits, and the new has not yet arrived. And this in-between space can feel unsettling. But it is also deeply fertile. It is where clarity is refined and where intention becomes quieter and more honest. Over time, you may notice that your presence itself changes the quality of interactions. You speak less, but with more weight. You listen more, without needing to fix or persuade. Your nervous system carries a steadier signal, and others may feel calmer around you without knowing why. This is not something you do. It is something you allow. The world has not become wrong. It is simply tuned to many frequencies at once. You are learning which ones nourish you and which ones drain you. This discernment is not withdrawal. It is wisdom, earned through experience. So if you find yourself feeling out of sync, no longer moved by the same currents, no longer compelled by the same noise, let this understanding settle gently. You have not failed to belong. You have shifted the channel through which you experience life. And that sense of not fitting, of quiet distance, of subtle misalignment, is not a sign of loss. It is a sign of elevation, of energy lifting into a range where less force is needed, where coherence replaces struggle, and where life begins to meet you with the same simplicity you are learning to meet it with. In this way, the language of frequency is not a theory. It is a lived reality. And once you recognize it, you stop trying to force yourself back into old alignments. You begin to trust that what is unfolding is not random, but guided by an intelligence that understands harmony far better than the mind ever could. 5. You begin to see the world as a stage. There comes a moment in this unfolding where your relationship with the world changes in a way that is difficult to describe unless you have lived it. Because nothing dramatic announces its arrival, yet everything feels subtly different. You still walk the same streets, hear the same conversations, watch the same events unfold, but you no longer experience them from the inside of the story. It is as if you have taken one quiet step back and now see the movement of life with a wider lens, not with judgment or superiority, but with a calm clarity that cannot be forced. You begin to notice how much of human behavior is shaped by fear and conditioning rather than conscious choice. People speak from anxiety about the future, from regret about the past, from the need to protect an identity they barely understand themselves. Reactions appear automatic, predictable, almost scripted, and once you see this clearly, it becomes difficult to unsee. The anger, the defensiveness, the urgency, the constant need to be right, no longer feel personal. They reveal themselves as patterns playing out through individuals rather than expressions of who those individuals truly are. This recognition changes the way you listen. Where you once felt compelled to respond, to correct, or to defend your position, You now sense the deeper movement underneath the words. You hear the fear behind the argument, the insecurity behind the certainty, the longing behind the control. As a result, the desire to engage in debates about right and wrong begins to fade, not because you no longer care about truth, but because you see how rarely truth is what people are actually fighting over. Most arguments are not about understanding, but about protecting a sense of self that feels threatened. The energy that once fueled conflict begins to dissipate, and in its place, there is space. You may still speak when something truly needs to be said, but the urgency is gone. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer trying to convince. The need to prove dissolves because you are no longer sourcing your sense of reality from external agreement. This can feel like a loss at first, especially if you once defined yourself by your opinions or your ability to articulate them. But what replaces it is a quieter strength that does not require constant reinforcement. As this clarity deepens, repeating patterns in the world become increasingly obvious. You see the same cycles of fear, hope, disappointment, and reaction playing out again and again, in families, in communities, in politics, in culture. The characters change, the language shifts, but the underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. It is not that people are foolish or malicious. It is that unconscious patterns replicate themselves when they are not seen. This recognition does not harden your heart. If anything, it softens it. Compassion grows naturally when you understand that most people are not acting from freedom, but from conditioning they did not choose. You remember your own years of living inside those same patterns, believing them to be personal, believing them to be reality. This memory prevents the clarity from turning into arrogance. You do not stand above the world. You stand alongside it, with understanding. At the same time, this awareness creates a subtle sense of distance. You are still present, still engaged, still capable of love and connection. But you are no longer fully identified with the drama unfolding around you. It is like watching a play where you can appreciate the performance without forgetting that it is a performance. You may feel the emotions, but you are not lost in them. You may care deeply, but you are not consumed. This is often misunderstood by others, and sometimes by yourself. From the outside, it can look like detachment or indifference. From the inside, it feels like clarity. You are not withdrawing from life. You are relating to it from a deeper level, one that is not constantly hijacked by reaction. This is why the sense of separation emerges. Not because you have rejected the world, but because you are no longer merged with its unconscious momentum. It is important to say this clearly, because the ego can easily distort this stage into a story of superiority. Seeing patterns does not make you better than anyone else. It simply means you are more aware of how the patterns work. Awareness is not an achievement. It is a responsibility. It invites humility, because the more clearly you see conditioning, the more you recognize how deeply it once shaped you as well. This humility keeps the heart open. You may find that you feel less anger and more sadness when you witness conflict, less outrage and more understanding when you see people acting from fear. This does not mean you condone harmful behavior. It means you understand its roots. And understanding changes how you respond, even when firm boundaries are needed. As the sense of life as a stage becomes clearer, your own role within it begins to loosen. You no longer feel compelled to play the same character you once did. Old identities feel constricting, like costumes that no longer fit. You may experiment with speaking less, reacting less, explaining less, and allowing yourself to be more undefined. This can feel vulnerable, because identity once provided structure and predictability. Without it, you are asked to trust presence rather than persona. The world may continue to perform its familiar drama, but your participation becomes more intentional. You choose where to place your energy. You engage where there is sincerity, and step back where there is noise. This discernment is not cold or calculating. It arises naturally from awareness. You begin to feel when engagement is nourishing and when it is draining, and you honor those signals without needing to justify them. Over time, this way of seeing brings a surprising sense of peace, not because the world becomes peaceful, but because you are no longer asking it to be something it is not. You stop expecting unconscious systems to behave consciously. You stop demanding clarity from environments built on confusion. This acceptance does not diminish your values. It grounds them. The separation you feel is not alienation. It is perspective. It is the distance required to see clearly without being consumed. Like stepping back from a painting to see the whole image rather than being lost in a single brushstroke. This distance allows wisdom to emerge naturally, and in this clarity, a simple truth reveals itself. You are not less connected to humanity because you see the patterns. You are more connected to what is real beneath them. The drama continues. The stage remains. The characters play their roles. But you are no longer asleep within the script. You are awake, watching with compassion, engaging with intention, and resting in a knowing that does not need to argue for its validity. The world is still a stage, but you are no longer lost in the performance. You are present, aware, and quietly free in the midst of it. 6. The sacred loneliness. There is a kind of loneliness that does not come from lack, rejection, or abandonment, but from depth, and it often arrives quietly. Even when your life looks full from the outside, you may find yourself surrounded by people, engaged in conversations, participating in social rhythms. Yet beneath all of it, there is a subtle sense that no one is truly meeting you where you now live. This feeling can be confusing at first, because nothing obvious is missing, and yet something essential feels untouched. This loneliness does not announce itself with pain in the usual way. It is not the sharp ache of being unwanted or unseen in a conventional sense. It is softer, deeper, and more difficult to name. You might notice it most clearly in moments of laughter that fade too quickly, or in conversations that stay on the surface no matter how sincere they seem. There is connection, but it stops short of the place inside you that is open through experience, loss, insight, and quiet endurance. What you begin to realize is that this sense of being alone in a crowd is not caused by others failing you. It arises because your inner landscape has changed. You have traveled inward, often through difficulty rather than choice, and the terrain you now inhabit is unfamiliar to those who have not walked there themselves. The distance you feel is not emotional coldness. It is the natural space between different levels of seeing. At this stage, it can feel as though no one can truly touch the depth within you, not because you are closed, but because that depth is not accessible through words alone. You may try to explain what you sense, what you have learned, what you now value, but language feels inadequate. Even when people listen with care, something essential remains unshared. This can bring a quiet grief, the realization that some parts of the journey are solitary by nature. Yet this loneliness is not empty. It is alive. It carries a presence that is difficult to describe but unmistakable once felt. There is a fullness within it, a sense of being accompanied by something wordless and steady. When you sit with this loneliness, rather than trying to escape it, you may notice that it does not collapse into despair. Instead, it opens into spaciousness. There is room to breathe, to reflect, to feel without needing immediate resolution. This is why this loneliness can be called sacred, not in a mystical or romantic sense, but in a deeply human one. It is the space where pretense falls away. Without the constant reinforcement of social identity, you are left with what is real. There is no audience here, no role to perform, no image to maintain. In this quiet, truth has a chance to surface, not as an idea, but as a lived knowing. In this space, you may begin to notice how much of your earlier life was shaped by the need to belong, to be understood, to be mirrored by others. These needs are not wrong. They are part of being human. But when they soften, when they no longer drive your choices, something more grounded takes their place. You start to relate to yourself not as a project to be validated, but as a presence to be honored. This is often the point where many people feel tempted to turn back, to re-enter familiar noise, to distract themselves with activity, opinion, or constant connection. The quiet can feel too exposed. Without the buffer of shared assumptions, you are face to face with your own inner life. This encounter requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to feel what arises without immediately labeling it as a problem. Those who have walked this path before, across cultures and centuries, have spoken of this stage in different languages, but the essence is remarkably similar. Many who later became known as teachers, mystics, or guides described a period of profound isolation, not necessarily physical, but existential. They spoke of feeling set apart, misunderstood, or inwardly alone, even while remaining engaged with the world. This was not a punishment or a failure. It was a threshold. The reason this stage appears so consistently is simple. When deeper awareness begins to stabilize, it can no longer be sustained by collective agreement alone. Truth, at this level, is intimate. It does not rely on consensus. It does not need applause. It requires space, and that space often looks like loneliness when viewed through the lens of the old self. As you remain with this sacred loneliness, something subtle begins to shift. You may notice that the ache within it softens into tenderness. There is a growing trust in your own inner orientation. You stop reaching outward quite so urgently. You listen more deeply, not just to others, but to the quiet signals within yourself. Decisions begin to arise from a place that feels less reactive and more settled. This does not mean you withdraw from relationships or stop caring about human connection. In fact, relationships can become more authentic because you are no longer asking others to complete you or to mirror your depth. You meet them as they are. You appreciate presence without demanding resonance. When genuine resonance does occur, it feels effortless and rare, like a quiet recognition rather than a dramatic bond. You may also discover that this loneliness teaches you discernment. You become more selective, not out of judgment, but out of respect for your own energy. Superficial engagement feels draining, while sincere presence feels nourishing. Even if it is brief, you begin to value quality over quantity, silence over noise, truth over performance. At times, this path can feel heavy. There may be moments when you long to be met fully, to have your inner world reflected without distortion. It is important to allow this longing without turning it into self-pity. The desire for deep connection is not a weakness. It is a sign of depth, but it is also a reminder that no human relationship can replace the grounding that comes from being at home within yourself. As this grounding strengthens, the loneliness changes its texture again. It becomes less about absence and more about presence. You sense that you are held by something larger than personal understanding, not as a belief, but as an experience of quiet alignment. Life feels less like something you must navigate alone and more like something you are participating in with awareness. This is why those who have passed through this stage often speak of it with gratitude, even if it was difficult at the time. The sacred loneliness strips away illusion gently but thoroughly. It teaches you to stand without leaning, to see without needing agreement, to love without clinging. It prepares you to return to the world not as someone seeking fulfillment, but as someone capable of presence. And when you do return, when you engage again with people, work, and ordinary life, something essential has changed. You are no longer searching for yourself in the eyes of others. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because you know what lives there. The loneliness that once felt isolating reveals itself as a doorway, one that led you back to a deeper, quieter, and more truthful way of being. This is the gift hidden within the sacred loneliness. It is not meant to last forever, but its imprint remains. It leaves you less dependent on external validation and more anchored in inner clarity. You carry it with you as a kind of silent companion, reminding you that even in the midst of the crowd, you are connected to something real, something steady, something that does not fade when the noise returns. And from this place, connection becomes simpler, more honest, and more compassionate, because it no longer needs to fill a void. It becomes an expression of wholeness rather than a remedy for absence. 7. You do not need to fix this feeling. Society has trained us, often very quietly and very early, to believe that comfort comes from fitting in, that safety is found in agreement, and that belonging requires us to smooth out anything within us that feels different, slower, deeper, or harder to explain. So when this sense of inner distance appears, the first instinct is not curiosity but correction, an almost automatic thought that something has gone wrong and must be adjusted, repaired, or overcome. Yet this reflex is not wisdom, it is conditioning, and it comes from a world that values function over truth and appearance over depth. From childhood, most of us were rewarded for adaptation. rather than authenticity, praised for being agreeable rather than honest, and subtly taught that to be accepted we must stay within the emotional and perceptual range of the group. So when awakening begins, and that range naturally shifts, the nervous system interprets it as danger, not because it is dangerous, but because it is unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity has long been mistaken for threat. Awakening, however, is not a process of blending more seamlessly into the existing structure of the world. It is a process of remembering what existed before that structure was internalized, before identity was shaped primarily through reaction and comparison, before meaning was borrowed rather than felt. And this remembering does not always feel expansive at first. It often feels like loss, like standing without the usual reference points, like being unable to lean on the old agreements that once made life feel predictable. The mind, trained to solve problems, immediately labels this space as something to be fixed. Yet what if this feeling is not a malfunction, but a recalibration? Not an error, but a pause. Not a breakdown, but a withdrawal of energy from patterns that no longer nourish you. Because awareness cannot deepen while it remains fully invested in the noise of constant engagement, and consciousness often steps back before it moves forward. The more you try to push this feeling away, the more you demand that it justify itself or disappear, the more it tightens, not out of resistance, but out of being misunderstood. Much like any part of us that has been ignored learns to speak louder, not to punish us, but to be heard. And in this sense, your discomfort is not an enemy, but a messenger that has been misinterpreted. I have learned, through years of attempting to outrun my own inner signals, that resistance gives weight to what it opposes, and that control, though it feels active, often delays the very clarity it seeks, because awakening does not respond to force. It responds to permission. And the moment you stop arguing with your experience is often the moment it begins to soften. When you allow this sense of separation to exist without naming it as a flaw, when you let it move through you without demanding a timeline or an explanation, something subtle but profound happens. The nervous system relaxes, the mind loosens its grip, and the feeling that once seemed sharp and isolating becomes spacious, almost tender, as though it had only been waiting for you to stop trying to escape it. This is one of the great paradoxes of inner transformation, that what we stop resisting often transforms on its own, not because we have mastered it, but because we have stopped standing in its way. And in this allowance, there is a quiet intelligence at work, one that does not need your effort, only your trust. Letting go of control does not mean passivity or collapse. It means recognizing the limits of force and the wisdom of timing. It means understanding that consciousness unfolds organically, much like healing in the body, and that interference often comes from fear rather than insight. Fear that if we do not manage the process, we will lose ourselves, when in truth, it is excessive management that obscures what is already stable beneath the surface. There is a deep humility in allowing yourself to be where you are, without rushing ahead to where you think you should be. And this humility is not weakness. It is alignment, because growth that is rushed rarely integrates, and awareness that is forced often fractures, while what is allowed has time to settle, to root, to become embodied rather than merely understood. You are not behind, and you are not broken. You are in a phase of reorientation that does not announce itself loudly, that does not come with external validation, and that cannot be optimized through effort, only respected through presence. And if you listen carefully, beneath the discomfort, there is often a quiet relief, a sense that for once, you are no longer pretending to be somewhere you have already outgrown. This feeling does not ask you to perform, to explain, or to improve. It asks you to stay, to breathe, and to notice what remains when the usual strategies fall away. Because what remains is often closer to truth than anything you have constructed. And while it may feel unfamiliar, it is not foreign. It is simply unconditioned. Over time, as you stop trying to fix yourself back into an old shape, a new kind of ease emerges. Not the ease of certainty, but the ease of honesty, the relief of no longer arguing with your own perception, and this ease becomes the ground from which genuine connection eventually grows. Connection that is no longer based on role or agreement, but on presence. The world will still be there. Relationships will still form, and life will continue to move, but you will meet it from a quieter place, one that does not need to be constantly affirmed because it is no longer dependent on alignment with the outer world to feel real. And from this place, engagement becomes a choice rather than a survival strategy. So if this feeling has arrived in your life, do not rush to diagnose it or dissolve it. Do not measure it against someone else's timeline or language. And do not assume it means you are failing at being human, because it may be that you are finally allowing yourself to be fully conscious. And consciousness, in its early stages, often feels like standing alone, not because you are separate, but because you are no longer asleep. Nothing here needs to be corrected, only understood. And understanding does not come through effort, but through gentle, sustained attention. The kind that says, I am willing to stay with what is true, even when it does not yet make sense. And this willingness, more than any technique or belief, is the doorway through which real transformation quietly enters. 8. Detachment does not mean emotional coldness. There is a common misunderstanding, often reinforced by shallow interpretations of spirituality, that inner distance automatically turns the heart numb, that stepping back from emotional entanglement somehow drains warmth from human connection. Yet in lived experience, the opposite is often true, because what fades is not love itself, but the unconscious grasping that once passed for love, and what remains is something quieter, steadier, and far more honest. When awakening deepens, you do not suddenly stop caring about people, about suffering, or about the fragile beauty of human life. You simply stop tying your sense of self to outcomes you cannot control, and this shift can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you were once someone who loved intensely through effort, sacrifice, and self-erasure. Mistaking attachment for devotion and emotional urgency for depth. You still love, but you no longer cling. And this distinction matters more than most people realize, because clinging is rooted in fear, the fear of loss, abandonment, or insignificance, while love, when it is free of fear, is spacious, responsive, and alive without being desperate. And it is this fear that quietly exhausts the heart, not love itself. In this state, you may notice that you can listen more fully without rushing to fix, that you can sit with another person's pain without being pulled under by it, and that you can offer care without bargaining for appreciation in return. Not because you have closed yourself off, but because you are no longer confusing empathy with self-sacrifice. Caring without being consumed is not indifference, it is clarity, and clarity allows you to remain present without losing your center, to stay open without dissolving your boundaries, and to engage with life without the constant undercurrent of anxiety that once accompanied emotional closeness, because your sense of worth is no longer negotiated moment by moment through external response. The heart, in this phase, does not harden, it actually softens, but it softens in a way that is resilient rather than fragile, like a muscle that has learned strength through flexibility rather than tension. And this softness allows love to flow without demand, without expectation, and without the subtle violence of needing another person to complete what you have not yet claimed within yourself. You still feel joy, sadness, tenderness, and concern, but these feelings move through you rather than defining you. And this movement is what keeps them alive, because emotions that are clutched stagnate, while emotions that are allowed to pass remain fluid, and fluidity is what gives the heart its capacity to renew itself. This is what is meant by love at a higher frequency. Not love that floats above human reality, but love that is no longer distorted by fear-based identity, love that does not require constant reassurance to remain present, and love that does not collapse into control when uncertainty appears, because it is grounded in being rather than in possession. When you love from this place, you do not need to prove it through overextension, nor do you need to protect yourself through withdrawal, because you are no longer oscillating between attachment and avoidance. You are simply available to connect when connection is true, and available to step back when stepping back is honest, without guilt or self-judgment. Some people may misread this steadiness as distance, especially those who are accustomed to intensity as a measure of intimacy. But intensity is not the same as depth, and drama is not the same as presence. And over time, those who are capable of meeting you in this quieter space will recognize that what you offer is not less, but more, because it is not diluted by unconscious need. You may find that relationships naturally reorganize around this new way of being, that some bonds loosen while others deepen, and that conversations become more authentic even when they are less frequent, because you are no longer performing emotional labor to maintain connection. You are simply showing up as you are, and this honesty becomes the foundation of whatever remains. Loving without losing yourself is not a skill that can be forced. It is a byproduct of self-recognition, because when you know who you are beneath roles and reactions, you no longer need to disappear in order to be close, and closeness that does not require disappearance is one of the most healing experiences a human being can offer another. This form of love does not rush, does not demand, and does not collapse under uncertainty. It waits without withholding, and it gives without depleting. And while it may not always be loud or dramatic, it is profoundly stabilizing, because it is rooted in presence rather than projection. You remain sensitive, but not raw, open, but not unguarded, and engaged, but not entangled. And this balance is not achieved through effort, but through alignment, the natural result of a nervous system that no longer believes survival depends on constant emotional negotiation. If you notice this shift in yourself, do not mistake it for withdrawal or emotional loss. Recognize it as maturation, as the heart learning to trust itself enough to remain open without armor, and strong enough to stay compassionate without self-betrayal, because true love does not require you to abandon your center. It asks you to bring your center with you into every interaction. In this way, detachment becomes not a wall, but a space where love can breathe, where connection can arise without pressure, and where you can finally meet others without leaving yourself behind. And this is not a lesser way of loving. It is a more sustainable one that honors both your humanity and your wholeness at the same time. 9. The transitional phase, before a deeper connection. There is a quiet truth that rarely gets spoken about during awakening, a truth that only reveals itself when you are already inside it. And that truth is this: before clarity settles in, before life begins to feel aligned again, there is often a stretch of deep uncertainty that feels heavier than anything you have known before. Not because something has gone wrong, but because something essential is rearranging itself beneath the surface of your awareness. Before the dawn arrives, the night does not gently fade, it deepens. And that deepest moment can feel unsettling when you do not yet recognize it as a threshold rather than an ending, because the mind is trained to interpret discomfort as danger, while the soul understands it as passage. This sense of disconnection you may be feeling now is not a void. It is a corridor, and corridors are not meant to be lived in permanently. They are meant to be walked through, even though, when you are inside one, it can feel as though the walls are closing in, and the direction ahead is unclear, especially when the landmarks that once guided you no longer apply. What you are experiencing is the space between identities, the subtle and often uncomfortable interval where the version of you that once knew how to function in the world is dissolving, while the version that will move through life with greater awareness has not yet fully formed. And it is precisely this in-between state that creates the feeling of being unanchored. The old version of you, the one shaped by conditioning, expectations, and unconscious striving, is loosening its grip, not because it was wrong or weak, but because it has completed the role it was meant to play. And like all structures that have served their purpose, it must eventually soften and give way to something more fitting for the terrain ahead. This dissolution can feel like loss, because identity loss is still loss, even when it leads to freedom. And it is natural to grieve the familiar patterns, the motivations, and even the struggles that once gave your life a sense of direction. Because familiarity, even when painful, provides orientation. And orientation is something the nervous system deeply craves. At the same time, the awakened version of you is not yet fully accessible, not because it is distant, but because it is still integrating. And integration is a quiet process that does not announce itself with certainty or confidence. It unfolds slowly through subtle shifts in perception, values, and presence that only become obvious in hindsight. During this phase, you may feel as though you are standing on ground that no longer feels solid, while not yet seeing where to place your next step. And this uncertainty can tempt you to retreat into old habits, simply to regain a sense of control, but control at this stage would only delay the natural completion of the transition. It helps to remember that the feeling of being lost often arises not because you have no direction, but because the compass you once relied on is no longer calibrated to who you are becoming, and learning to trust a new internal orientation takes time, patience, and a willingness to remain present without rushing toward premature answers. This transitional space is not empty, even when it feels quiet. It is rich with reorganization. As beliefs loosen, priorities reorder, and the inner noise that once defined your sense of self gradually settles, making room for a deeper form of knowing that does not depend on constant mental activity to exist. You may notice that your tolerance for superficial engagement decreases, that your body responds more quickly to misalignment, and that your intuition begins to speak more clearly, even if its guidance feels subtle at first. And these are not signs of withdrawal from life, they are signs of attunement, of learning to listen to a different layer of intelligence within you. Patience becomes essential here, not as a virtue to be cultivated, but as a necessity for balance, because forcing clarity before the inner landscape has settled only recreates the very tension this phase is designed to release. And the wisdom of this passage lies in allowing yourself to be unfinished without self-condemnation. There is a quiet courage in staying with this discomfort, in choosing to remain open rather than numbing or distracting yourself back into familiarity. Because each moment, you allow uncertainty without resistance. You are teaching your system that safety does not depend on certainty, and this lesson changes everything. Gradually, without a dramatic turning point, you may begin to sense a new kind of connection emerging, not necessarily to people or circumstances at first, but to yourself, to a steadiness beneath thought that does not fluctuate with external validation. And from this steadiness, a more authentic engagement with the world naturally grows. When connection returns, it often does so differently than before, quieter, less performative, and more grounded, because it is no longer built on the need to belong at any cost, but on resonance, and resonance cannot be forced. It can only be recognized when it appears. This is why rushing this phase only prolongs it, while allowing it to unfold at its own pace brings a depth of integration that cannot be achieved through effort. Because what is forming now is not a new persona, but a more transparent expression of who you already are beneath layers of adaptation. Be gentle with yourself here, because this is not a phase that responds well to pressure or self-criticism. It responds to kindness, rest, and honest presence, to the simple acknowledgement that you are in transition. And that transition, by its nature, is not meant to feel resolved. The loneliness that may accompany this stage is not a verdict on your future. It is a temporary consequence of outgrowing old forms of connection before new ones align. And while it can feel isolating, it is also a sign that you are no longer willing to dilute yourself to avoid being alone. Trust that this space is purposeful, that it is preparing you for a deeper, more stable connection to life, one that does not collapse when circumstances shift, and that the patience you offer yourself now will become the foundation of the compassion you extend to others later. Nothing is being taken from you without reason, and nothing essential is being lost. What is dissolving is what can no longer support your growth, and what is emerging will feel more natural than anything you have known before, even if it takes time for that familiarity to return. Stay with yourself in this passage, not as a problem to be solved, but as a process to be honored. Because on the other side of this quiet dismantling is not distance from life, but a deeper intimacy with it, one that begins within you and gradually reshapes everything you touch. 10. When you stabilize in presence. There comes a moment, often without ceremony, when you realize that the restless searching has softened, not because all questions have been answered, but because the need to constantly orient yourself through the outside world has quietly dissolved, and in its place there is a steadiness that does not depend on recognition, agreement, or belonging in the ways it once did. Stabilizing in presence does not feel like achieving something new. It feels more like stopping the effort to become, like finally setting down a heavy bag you did not realize you had been carrying for years, and noticing that your breath deepens naturally when you are no longer trying to justify your existence through roles, achievements, or constant engagement. At this stage, The urge to fit back into the old world simply to feel secure loses its power. Not because the world is rejected, but because your sense of home has shifted inward. And once home is internal, the pressure to seek external confirmation of worth or direction fades without resistance. You no longer need to belong to the old structures, conversations, or identities that once defined you, because belonging has been replaced by alignment. And alignment is quieter, more subtle, yet far more stable than the approval-based connections that once felt necessary for survival. As this inner stabilization deepens, something unexpected begins to happen. Life starts to approach you differently, not as a reward, but as a reflection. Because when you are no longer chasing connection, you become available for it, and availability has a way of reorganizing the field around you. People who resonate with your depth begin to appear without effort, not in large numbers, but with a quality of presence that feels nourishing rather than draining. And these relationships are marked by honesty, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that neither person is there to complete the other. Conversations slow down, not because there is less to say, but because there is no rush to fill space. And in that spaciousness, words carry more weight, silence becomes comfortable, and connection is felt as something shared rather than negotiated. You may notice that life itself adopts a gentler rhythm, that your days feel less crowded even when they are full, because your attention is no longer fragmented by constant mental commentary, and this unfragmented attention allows ordinary moments to feel rich, without requiring intensity or novelty. The pace of your life may appear slower from the outside, but from within, it feels more complete, as though you are finally inhabiting your own experience rather than rushing through it in search of something just beyond reach. And this completeness does not depend on circumstances being perfect. Tasks are still completed, responsibilities still met, but they are carried with less psychological weight, because presence removes the extra layer of resistance that once turned simple actions into sources of stress. And in this simplicity, a quiet joy emerges that is not dependent on excitement. You become less reactive without becoming passive, more responsive without becoming rigid, because presence creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, choice naturally arises, not as a moral obligation, but as an expression of clarity. What changes most noticeably is not your outer life, but your relationship to it. Because the same situations that once triggered anxiety or self-doubt now pass through with less friction. And when challenges arise, they are met with steadiness rather than collapse, curiosity rather than fear. There is a growing trust in life at this stage, not a blind optimism, but a grounded confidence that whatever arises can be met from a centered place. And this trust is not based on control, but on the lived experience of having walked through uncertainty and discovered that you remained intact. As presence stabilizes, you begin to sense that you were never truly disconnected, that what you once called disconnection was actually the loosening of false attachments that had kept you oriented toward survival rather than truth. And this realization brings a deep compassion for the earlier stages of your journey. You see now that the feeling of being lost was a necessary passage, that the solitude, the confusion, and the quiet dismantling were not detours, but initiations, guiding you back to a simpler, more honest way of being with yourself and the world. Home, in this sense, is not a place or a role. It is a state of inner coherence, where thought, feeling, and action are no longer in conflict. And from this coherence, your presence becomes a stabilizing influence for others without you needing to teach, convince, or explain. You no longer feel compelled to announce your understanding or defend your way of seeing, because presence speaks for itself through how you listen, how you respond, and how you allow others to be as they are without needing to correct or improve them. This does not mean life becomes free of pain or challenge. It means that pain is no longer interpreted as evidence of failure, and challenge is no longer met with self-betrayal, because you have learned that being present with what is does not diminish you, it strengthens you. In this stability, gratitude arises naturally, not as a practice, but as a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that something essential has been remembered, something that was never truly lost, only obscured by the noise of becoming. You understand now that you did not fall out of connection with life. You fell out of alignment with yourself, and returning to presence restored that alignment, without requiring you to escape the world or reject your humanity. This is why the journey does not end with detachment, but with integration, with being fully here, without being entangled, fully engaged, without being consumed, and fully yourself, without needing to be defined by anything outside of your own direct experience. When you stabilize in presence, the sense of exile fades, and what remains is a quiet belonging that does not depend on location, community, or identity, because it is rooted in the simple truth of being here, breathing, aware, and at home within yourself. You did not lose connection. You did not drift away from life, and you did not become something other than human. You returned to the ground from which all meaningful connection arises, and from that ground, life meets you with a depth that was always waiting for your return. The awakening message. Let us return, gently, to the question we began with, not to repeat it, but to meet it from a different place than where we first stood. Because questions change their meaning when consciousness deepens, and what once felt like a wound can later reveal itself as a doorway. You may have asked yourself, perhaps in quiet moments you never shared with anyone, why the world no longer feels the way it used to, why the noise feels louder, the pace more exhausting, the conversations less nourishing, and why a subtle distance has grown between you and a life you once tried so hard to belong to. From this new vantage point, the question is no longer whether something is wrong with you, but whether something is finally becoming honest within you, because what you once interpreted as alienation may now be recognized as discernment, and what felt like loss may reveal itself as a release from ways of living that no longer reflect who you truly are. The feeling of being lost, when seen through awakened awareness, is no longer a personal failure. It is an invitation, a quiet but persistent call, asking you to stop measuring yourself against a world built on unconscious momentum, and to begin listening to the deeper intelligence moving through your own experience. Nothing about this invitation is aggressive or urgent. It does not demand that you change your life overnight or reject the world around you. It simply asks for your honesty, for your willingness to acknowledge that the old ways of finding meaning, security, and identity may no longer be sufficient for the depth that is now emerging within you. This sense of not fitting in is not a punishment. It is a signal, a sign that your inner frequency has shifted enough that certain environments, values, and rhythms can no longer sustain you, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer aligned with who you are becoming. There is no mistake here, no detour that needs correcting, and no urgency to force yourself back into familiarity just to relieve the discomfort, because the discomfort itself carries information, and that information is guiding you away from self-abandonment and towards self-recognition. The most compassionate thing you can do in this phase is to stop trying to return to who you were, because the version of you that once knew how to survive in the old world was built for a different level of awareness, and asking that version to carry you forward now would only recreate the very fragmentation you are in the process of healing. Instead, allow the unfamiliar to remain unfamiliar for a while. Allow the silence to be quiet, without rushing to fill it, and allow yourself to exist without a clear narrative of who you are supposed to be, because it is often in the absence of story that truth finds space to emerge. This is not about becoming someone new, despite how it may appear from the outside. It is about remembering what was always present beneath layers of adaptation, expectation, and learned urgency. And remembrance is a gentle process that unfolds through permission rather than force. If there is one message worth carrying forward from this journey, it is this: do not rush to reclaim an identity that no longer fits, simply because the space between versions feels uncomfortable, because that space is not empty. It is fertile, and what is growing there cannot be hurried without being distorted. You are not being asked to isolate yourself from life, but to meet life from a place that is no longer defined by fear, comparison, or the need to constantly prove your worth. And this meeting begins not with action, but with presence, with the simple act of being where you are, without resistance. Sit with the quiet moments, even when they feel awkward or unproductive by old standards. Because quiet is not a lack of movement. It is a different kind of movement. one that reorganizes your inner world so that your outer life can later arise from clarity rather than compulsion. Allow yourself to rest in not knowing, to pause without justification, and to breathe without needing a reason, because these small acts of permission recalibrate your nervous system and remind your body that safety does not depend on constant engagement with a world that no longer mirrors your inner truth. There is wisdom in slowing down without withdrawing, in remaining present without forcing connection, and in trusting that what is meant to meet you will do so when you are no longer chasing it from a place of lack. As you sit with this stillness, you may notice that something within you begins to settle, not into certainty, but into coherence, a sense that even without answers, you are no longer at war with your own experience. And this peace is not dramatic, it is subtle, almost ordinary, yet profoundly stabilizing. From this place, life does not need to be fixed or improved before it can be met with openness. And the world, though still complex and imperfect, begins to feel less threatening when you are no longer trying to extract your identity from it. The invitation here is not to withdraw your love, your care, or your humanity, but to offer them from a grounded place, one that does not require you to abandon yourself in order to belong, because belonging that costs you your inner truth is not belonging, it is survival. Let the world be as it is for now, without asking it to confirm who you are, and let yourself be as you are, without rushing to explain or justify the changes you feel unfolding within you, because authenticity does not need immediate validation to be real. If you find yourself in moments of quiet reflection, simply sitting, breathing, and allowing awareness to rest in the body, trust that this is not wasted time. It is integration, and integration is what allows awakening to become embodied rather than conceptual. There is no need for dramatic music here, no climactic resolution, and no final declaration of arrival. Because awakening does not conclude with an ending, it softens into a way of living. One breath, one moment, one honest pause at a time. And so, as we come to this closing, let there be a moment of stillness, not as an absence of words, but as an acknowledgement that some truths are better felt than explained, and that your own experience is the ultimate teacher in this process. Perhaps you are not disconnected from the world in the way you once feared. Perhaps you are not broken, withdrawn, or failing to belong. Perhaps what is happening is far simpler and far more profound. Perhaps you are not lost in the world at all. Perhaps you are awakening from it,